I am watching every single Criterion film. In this video I have Gilda from 1946, which is one of the defining post-war noirs, a film that turns a glossy nightclub melodrama into something far more unstable and psychologically charged. On the surface, it's a story about jealousy, resentment, and romantic revenge. Underneath it is a film about control and who gets to look, who gets to desire, and who gets punished for being desired. This plot also seems simple on the surface, as Johnny Farrell, a small-time grifter who has landed in Buenos Aires, is rescued and hired by the wealthy and shadowy Balin Munson, who later marries the glamorous Gilda. Johnny and Gilda immediately recognize each other from a previous relationship, and their reunion ignites a vicious theatrical war of teasing banter and humiliation. Balin becomes increasingly suspicious as Johnny becomes increasingly bitter, and Gilda becomes increasingly trapped in a triangle that is as much about male ego as it is about love. The film's famous structure is built around withholding and reversal. What begins as a sleek crime story gradually reveals itself to be a cruel emotional chamber piece, and what makes the story so effective is that it keeps shifting moral alignment. Johnny seems like the narrator of the film's emotional world, but he is not especially admirable. He is petty, controlling, and deeply invested in punishing Gilda for her autonomy. Balin initially appears like the classic noir mastermind, but he is really a conduit for repression and paranoia. Gilda, meanwhile, is framed at first as a cheater or flirt, only for the film to expose how much of that image is projected onto her by men who cannot tolerate female independence. The movie constantly asks whether Gilda is dangerous or whether she is simply being made into danger by the men around her. That tension is central to the story. Gilda's beauty becomes a weapon used against her as she's watched, judged, and romanticized, but almost never understood. The film is obsessed with surfaces like gowns, cigarette smoke, nightclub lights, mirrors, hair, posture, but those surfaces are not empty decorations. They are how the characters perform power and vulnerability. Gilda's famous striptease performance, like the put the blame on Mame sequence, is not just erotic spectacle, but is a moment of public self-assertion. She is performing because the men in the room have already reduced her to a performance. The scene's charge comes from the contradiction that she seems to be offering herself up to the male gaze, but she is also mocking it, manipulating it, and turning it back on the male gaze. Johnny and Gilda's relationship is built on their unresolved past, so the passion is inseparable from cruelty. They do not speak like lovers, but like rivals. Their exchanges have the rhythm of seduction, but also of a legal agreement, and that is part of what gives the film its bite. Love is not presented as healing, but a form of compulsion, shame, and memory. The movie is unusually honest about how desire can be fused with humiliation, especially when masculinity is defined by possession, and female sexual freedom is treated as betrayal. The film also has a strong post-war moral instability, as it belongs to the noir cycle in which a war-era dislocation has left everyone morally compromised. Buenos Aires is less a real place than a fever dream setting, as it's diverse, glamorized, and detached from ordinary social order. The casino, the club, the penthouse, and the nightclub backstage areas all feel like enclosed systems of corruption and performance. Nobody here lives naturally. Instead, everyone is acting, negotiating, concealing, and that fits noir's broader worldview. But Gilda pushes it into almost operatic excess. Rita Hayworth is the whole movie's gravitational center. Her Gilda is legendary because she makes the character simultaneously radiant, wounded, playful, and guarded. Hayworth's performance is less about volume than control. She knows exactly how to move a shoulder, delay a smile, or flatten a line reading so it lands as either a joke or a challenge. What is remarkable is how she turns glamour into a psychological texture, because Gilda is not just beautiful, she is alert to the fact that beauty is being used against her. Hayworth gives her a mix of flirtation and fatigue that keeps the character from becoming just iconic in the empty sense. She is iconic because she feels trapped inside the myth being built around her. Glenn Ford gives Johnny a very different kind of power. He is not a charismatic hero in the usual sense. He often plays him with a clipped, almost bruised hardness that makes his bitterness feel personal rather than generic. That works well because Johnny's central flaw is emotional fragility disguised as masculine competence. Ford's performance makes the character's resentment clear without excusing it. He seems perpetually on the verge of either confession or retaliation, which is exactly right for a noir anti-hero. George McReady as Balin adds the necessary chill. He is elegant, precise, and unsettling, a man whose authority feels fake and fragile. McReady's performance is important because Balin could have been a typical villain, but instead he becomes a figure of authoritarian control, a man who treats people as possessions while remaining emotionally ambiguous himself. His presence gives the film its sinister structure, while the triangle is not just romantic but hierarchical. Charles Vidor's direction is crucial to why all of this works. The film is visually lush, but it never feels soft. Vidor in the cinematography uses shadows, reflective surfaces, and carefully staged movement to create a world where every gesture seems to have consequences. He handles the nightclub and backstage spaces especially well, making them feel like places where identity is constantly being staged and revised. The camera often observes rather than rushes, allowing tension to build through looks and pauses. That patience is what lets the film's melodrama become something darker and more precise. Vidor also understands that Gilda needs to balance polish and menace. The film is glamorous but not secure. Its elegance is undermined by emotional cruelty. Even the romantic chemistry is contaminated by suspicion. That tonal instability is one of the reasons the movie remains so memorable. It's because it's both seductive and punishing, a fantasy that keeps revealing its own rot. Gilda's most noteworthy achievement is that it refuses to simplify its central woman. Gilda is not just a femme fatale. and not just a victim. She is both performer and target, someone whose intelligence and wit are constantly active beneath the surface the men insist on seeing. The movie's ending partially restores order, but it does not erase the damage that got there. That lingering bitterness is what keeps Gilda from becoming merely a stylish reminder. I think Gilda remains one of noir's most clever portraits of desire as a form of power struggle, and of a woman whose image is so magnetic that the men around her mistake it for the truth of who she is. And I give Gilda an A minus, an 8 out of 10, and 4 stars. And I thought about putting it higher, but I think A minus is just right there for now. I probably will move stuff around in my ranking of these movies eventually because there's going to be so many of them. But I would also like to point out that I also wasn't aware of this before watching the film, but after doing research, but Gilda has what many believe to be a homoerotic subtext, since movies at the time were banned from having gay representation, and the intense dynamic between Balin and Johnny was seen as a suppressed romance or even a bisexual triangle with Gilda, which made me see this movie through a whole nother lens. And even Glenn Ford, who plays Johnny, acknowledged the homoerotic nature of the bond between Johnny and Balin, even if Vidor, the director, claimed otherwise. And I think that's just really cool, and I'm going to keep that in mind the next time I watch. But even now, I kind of like see how like people can see that. But the next time I watch this movie, I'm definitely going to keep that in mind and like try to see it through that lens. And it kind of just went over my head, but definitely going to be looking closely for that. Let me know your thoughts down below if you've seen Gilda, if you liked it, if you didn't like it. I'd like to hear your thoughts down below, and don't forget to like and follow.